Right, so this is just a quick talk through of what we expect you to be able to do for the fourth controlled assessed task in French and Spanish, which will be about health and sport. And as you can see, it's about discussing healthy lifestyles amongst young people. So if we first start with the task itself, and what I'm going to try to do is just describe what the task is to you, and tell you what you have to do and what you don't have to do. So first of all, at the top, as it says, this is the speaking part of the task, and this is only for those students who either didn't complete one of the controlled assessment tasks, or when upon discussion, once you've talked to your teacher about where they think your marks currently are, that both of you think that it might be a good idea to sit another speaking piece. That's just this little bit here, so that's what that's there for. However, there is a direct link into what's up here by comparison to what you then have to do for the written element, which is slightly different but which is pretty much the same. So let's have a look at what this task is. So if I start with where it says about the written element, where it says that you will be expected to follow this up with a piece of between 200 to 300 words that will as always be the same as the preparation for all parts of the spoken word. So I'll just highlight that. So it's all parts of the spoken work, and that you might also wish to include something about eating and drinking. So I'm going to start there, because you don't need to include anything about eating and drinking in the speaking part. So we'll start with that. I'm then going to go back to the speaking element, because this is where you get ideas for the kinds of things that you will need to write when it comes to the written element. So first of all, we've got, are you in good health? We've got, what do you do to keep fit? Do you exercise regularly? What did you do to stay fit before? What did you used to eat when you were younger, and did you used to do any sports? But note that what this says is that these are things that you could include in your answers, particularly if you're doing the spoken element. So this is the first part of the spoken element, which is just about a presentation. So that is that you would start that presentation and you would just talk for 2 to 4 minutes. If it's part of the written work, though, it would also involve things to do with parts 1 and 2 here. So what will you do in the future to maintain health, and what should you do, and discuss addictions affecting young people. Now, if in the speaking element, what that would look like would be the remainder of the time. So you do a presentation here, you then move down into part 2, will be a discussion with your teacher, where your teacher will ask you the following 2 questions that you would answer. So if it were the speaking piece, you would absolutely do something to do with this, but not necessarily all of these, some of them, but you would absolutely do number 1 and number 2. Those would be things that you would prepare. For the written element, we need to think about what each of these entail. Now, these first 3 that I've got here, are you in good health, what do you do to keep fit, and do you exercise regularly, are all in the present tense, and are relatively straightforward things to do. The next 3 here are all in the past tense. In fact, they're all in the imperfect tense, because they're about things that you used to do. So we've got the imperfect tense as one of the past tenses. And of course, if you wanted to include the preterite tense, i.e. to talk about something which you have done recently, then what you'd be thinking about doing is including, and you could include answers to these, but on top of that, you could also say what you did maybe yesterday, or what you did last weekend, etc. So this is how we would get the preterite tense in as well. So those are the tenses element. Now obviously there's the present and the past tense there. Point number 1, which if it were the speaking you would do, if it's the writing I would suggest that you do this part, would be that this is in the future tense. Things that involve the word should mean to say that it's in the conditional tense. And then discussing addictions affecting young people whilst still in the present tense does enable you to use a much more complex range of vocabulary and expressions. And that's why I think that it would be a useful idea to make sure that you do include number 2 and number 1 here in your written work, and that you make sure that you don't just answer these parts. If you just did those and just did this one here, you would only be talking in the present tense. And of course, when we're thinking about how we can improve our grades, we need to make sure that we use a range of tenses. So what I would suggest would be that you maybe do 1, 2, or even all 3 of these in the present tense, that you choose 1 or 2 of these that are in the past tense to make sure that you've covered the past tense, and that you also choose these 2 down here. But you must also remember, if I just very quickly show you the written criteria mark sheet here, that we're aiming to get into this section here. So we don't aim to communicate only essential information of the task here. We don't aim to only have a few phrases or short sentences which are accurate enough to be recognisable. That's not what we aim for. What we aim for is this area down here. So we all aim for A's and A stars, and the way that we aim for that is to make sure that we respond fully to the task, that we try for there not to be ambiguity, so we don't try to say things which are confusing. We make sure that we use detail in our work. We use relevant information to convey facts and to narrate events. So when you're talking about addictions, say why you would or wouldn't do those things. Say what's wrong about those addictions. Say why people do those addictions. Give examples of when you've seen people who've had those addictions. That's narrating something. Make sure that you develop and justify individual ideas and points of view, and look at the words convincingly and extensively. Make sure that those things are in there. So if you think that your work is quite basic, then make it less basic by making it convincing and extensive. Here's the part where it talks about the range of structures, and for this I would suggest that you use one of 2 things. You can either use the vocabulary books that you've been given out, or you could similarly, if I open this document here, this is one of the speaking booklets. If I close that down, the way that we get to this, of course, is just to type in bit.ly/mflperin.ca, and when I click this open, hopefully in no time at all it's going to open up these things here. And of course you've got all of the work that I've done with French classes in there, and all of the Spanish work is in this folder here. But the controlled assess, that little part there, actually when we open that up, we find that these are the controlled assessment booklets. And the French one is here, the Spanish one is here, and if we open these booklets up, we'll find, if I just open the French one for you here, and just scroll down a little bit, it will give you lots of information about lots of different things. Hopefully that'll open up relatively shortly, where it can tell you a couple of things. First of all, it gives you the mark schemes, so you can see what the criteria are for you to get the grade, but it also gives you lots of examples of structures that you could use. So where it talks about using a range of structures in here, so confident and accurate use of variety of clause types, vocab, idioms and structures, the best place for this is to go into the controlled assessment booklet. So to summarise, this then is our task. So what you should be thinking of doing is making sure that in your 200 to 300 words, you make sure that you include something in the present tense, something in the past tense, something in the future and conditional tenses, and that you make sure that you use a variety of language. You don't have to include everything. That's the important thing to take away. So don't try to include everything, because you just haven't got enough space to include everything. If you tried to include everything that was on this sheet here, if you tried to include all of those things, you'd go way over the 300 words. So try not to include everything. Any questions, of course, ask your teacher.